Whisky.com, where fine spirits meet. The Isle of Arran lies at the west coast of Scotland. On the Isle of Arran you have a nature reserve, and that nature reserve includes a lot of fern, insects, grasses, and all the kind of stuff that live in a wet environment. Besides this nature reserve, the Isle of Arran has a small distillery. It's called the Arran Distillery. The distillery is at the north end of the island, near the small town Lochanza. On the hillside there are a lot of heather and marshes, and these gather a lot of water that runs down through the rivers and ends up in the sea. The Arran Distillery needs this water for their whiskey production. First of all, it needs the water for the mashing, and second of all, it needs the water to cool down the alcoholic fumes in the condensers next to the pot stills. Here you can see the grass line and the peat lying below it. This ditch was cut out to supply the river with enough water to run the distillery. The hills at the Isle of Arran are very nice. We just took a hike through the hills, and now we're returning back to the valley where the distillery lies. To our right is the river that we saw earlier that runs down to the sea and the distillery. Although the hills of the Isle of Arran are not very high, you should take a good pair of shoes with you, as the path up the hills can be a bit rocky. Just before you reach the distillery, you should take a right and have a look at the barrage that was built to supply the distillery with water. Life at the Isle of Arran is very decelerated if you compare it to a big city like New York or London. It is very idyllic and calm, and you almost forget that you're living in the 21st century. But life on the Isle of Arran distillery would be a bit too calm and boring if there wouldn't be the distillery. You can always hear the humming sound of the ventilators and the steam of the pot stills. On the right you see the new dunnage, and on the left you see the old dunnages. The small building with a pagoda on top is the visitor center. The pagodas today serve no purpose, as they don't peat the malt anymore. There's a strong wind blowing at the Isle of Arran. We are already looking forward to the distillery tour. We booked in front, so we still have to wait for about half an hour. Next to the distillery is a public soccer field, and they certainly don't have to cut their grass. The first building with the windows is the cafe. Here you can enjoy nice Scottish traditional food. The visitor center and the distillery are open for tours all around the year. The distillery was established in 1995, and 2 years later the Queen took a visit to the distillery and got a present of 2 casks. The insides of the visitor center show the main ingredients for the whiskey making production. It's barley and water. All around the center are coffee tables, and even the bigger crowd can be fed here. This is the group in front of us, and yes, there are only 2 people. Tours start at regular interval, and they start even if you only have 2 people. The right building with the high glass front is the mash house. Right next to it is the still house with the pot stills inside. Behind the windows you can see a faint glimpse at the spirit receivers.
They hold about 250 litres, and the smallest ones, the 3 in the top, are the barrel at 200.
Here the Scotsman explains how the maturation in the
90%
barrels,
of the barrels
or
used
Scottish
at the moment
barrels,
making malt whiskey
is
come
carried out.
from America.
The first thing you notice when you enter the mashing building is a sweet and fermented taste that lies heavy in the air. A very nice experience, and sometimes when you have a very malty whiskey, you feel that smell. On the right, the steel pot with the copper lid is the mash tun. Here the sugar is washed out of the malt to provide a good base for the fermenters. This is now an open washback, and now here the mash is fermented to the beer that goes into the wash still. This is now the wash still. You can always identify the wash still at the watch glass, here at the top left. The wash still boils the low alcoholic substance, and the alcoholic fumes are then condensed in this long copper tube. To get the right flavors and control the whole distillation process, you have the spirit safe that selects where the condensed fumes are going. On top of the washbacks, you see little pumps that pump the finished wash into the wash still. And there is a second ventilator to prevent the bubbles from going too high. And this view makes us feel welcome here. This is one of the posters that we sell in our German retail shop. And these are the spirit receivers. Spirit receivers store the intermediate products from the wash and the spirit stills. This is now the spirit still. The spirit still doesn't need a watch gas because it can't boil over. The mash and the still building together are very compact, so the ways between all the stages are very short. Now we see the mash tun again, and behind the mash tun is the malt mill. The mill is used to grind down the malt. The product afterwards is called grist. And in front of the mash tun is the underbag. It is there to collect the sugary, watery substance that comes from the mash tun. First you have barley. This is then malted, and afterwards you have the grist that goes into the mash tun. Everything is monitored by computers so that all the temperatures and quality standards are in limits. The temperatures of the mash tun have to be just exactly right, and it took generations to find out how to get the most sugar out of a malt. The blue thing in the middle is a heat exchanger. It takes out the energy from the mash tun and gives it to another process. This time the tour is a bit bigger, and the tour guide explains them all the processes in great detail. These are the manholes. They are rarely used, but sometimes something gets burned at the bottom and you need to clean the pot still. On almost every manhole you will read the name A. Forsyth. The Forsyth family is the coppersmith in Rosses that supplies nearly all the pot stills for the distilleries. You rarely get to see the stuff below the pot stills. Here you see a lot of tubes for pumping stuff into or out of the pot stills and supplying the hot steam for the heating. These are the malt silos that store the malt from the big malting companies. This truck doesn't carry whiskey. It carries the liquid residuals from the distillation process to a nearby farm. On the trailer on the left, you see the solid components from the mash tun that are also being carried to local farmers. And this is the malt silo. The Arran Distillery is a very nice place to work. You have a great view up to the hills. But if you have such a great nature reserve, the Arran Distillery has the responsibility to preserve this nature reserve. So all this process water that is being heated up is not just run down into the river, but first it is cooled down to the natural temperature to not disturb the wildlife of the fish or any other creatures. Here we have an oil tank, the different residual tanks, the malt silos, and on the left we now see the dunnages. The inside of the warehouses or the dunnages was very dark, so I have provided a few photos for that. These are refill sherry casks that wait for their filling. In the old dunnages, the casks are stored 4 layers high. The color coding is for the different years the casks have been filled. And these are now port pipes. Note the bricked walls. They keep the temperature at a steady level, and so you get a very slow maturing single malt Scotch whisky. This is a very special forklift for a wrecked warehouse where the casks are stored on their sides. This is one of the casks that have been presented to the Queen. It carries the name of the Prince Harry. This is one of the vatting tanks. It mixes the whiskey before it goes off to the bottling. The new warehouse is now a lot higher, has steel walls, and the casks are stored in an upright position to get a better grip with a forklift. We finish our tour with a quick look through the distillery shop, where you can find almost any standard bottling from the distillery. Thank you for watching this distillery tour, and if you like this video, then don't forget to rate, comment and subscribe.